Hi, everyone. This is Michael Clark, joined by two of my colleagues, James Walton and Joe Anzalone. This is the second part in our annuity purchase video series. Part one, we dealt with fiduciary responsibilities in pension plan annuity purchases. Today, we're going to talk about the different fiduciary arrangements that plan sponsors may encounter if they're going through one of these transactions. James, let me start with you. What are the key service providers that a plan sponsor might encounter if they're going through a pension risk transfer or annuity placement?
Well, I think firstly, it's important to point out that the plan will already have advisors, actuarial advisors, investment consultants, legal counsel, and those will continue to be retained typically and will be involved to some degree in the process, even if just providing data. But there are three specific roles that relate directly to annuity purchases, which we'll talk about. And those roles could be performed by one of the incumbent advisors, the plan actuary, for example, but they could also be provided by an advisor that the committee or the sponsor hasn't used before. So the first is the annuity placement consultant. That's really a broker who will project manage the transaction and the purchase of the annuities. They will seek bids from the insurance companies and run the auction process, which will ultimately help the committee choose an insurance company. And they'll often be involved immediately after the transaction in some of the transition arrangements also. The second role that relates directly to annuity purchases is that of an independent expert. So the DOL fiduciary guidance refers to hiring an independent expert. It's suggested that committees do that, who will perform due diligence on the insurance companies that are in scope for the transaction to determine if they are sufficiently safe for the annuity to be placed with them. So that will typically involve financial due diligence, as well as other areas that may be of interest and important to the committee, such as administration, for example. The third provider that can be used in a transaction is an independent fiduciary, and they will typically be brought in at larger transactions where the sponsor's looking to minimize fiduciary risk and appoint a provider called an independent fiduciary who will actually make the selection of the insurance company on behalf of the committee, as well as perform other roles associated with the transaction, such as instructing the disbursement of assets. The independent fiduciary may actually hire an independent expert as well. So there certainly can be more than one provider involved. But we don't typically see independent fiduciaries on every transaction. It just tends to be those larger ones.
Excellent. Thanks for that overview, James. I think that was spot on and hopefully helpful to those that are watching. Joe, let me turn a question to you here. So these different service providers that James talked about, how do you actually see them engaging in the marketplace?
Yeah, it really depends on the service provider, Michael. I think that there's some annuity placement consultants, that those brokers that James talked about, who interact with the insurance companies, who will also provide the insurance expertise and the due diligence. Those two first roles that James just described are often provided by the same provider. And by the way, that provider might be, as James said, the plan actuary, for example, who's also providing actuarial analysis, or perhaps even investment guidance relating to the annuity purchase specifically. There are some annuity placement consultants who will not provide insurance due diligence and explicitly say, no, we don't provide that service. Here's a list of providers we work with, and we're happy to work with you to select one that will meet your needs. So it really depends on the providers in question. And I would say the other thing I think about as a plan sponsor when selecting these providers is it's important to understand what services and what roles are actually being played by your providers. And in particular, I think the fiduciary status of those providers is critical. I think the broker role is not often seen as a fiduciary role, but one where certain providers do take on fiduciary responsibility is that insurance due diligence and expertise. Certainly the independent fiduciary role that James described, that third role that happens in the larger transactions, is clearly a fiduciary role, but there are some providers even for smaller transactions that are providing that due diligence that will take on fiduciary responsibility, and others won't. They'll give you their opinion on the different insurers, but ultimately the decision on which ones are acceptable up to the plan sponsor. So again, the different ways of interacting with the marketplace, what we think is really important is for plan sponsors to fully understand the services they're getting, the responsibility that's being taken on by the provider, and making sure that they have all the different ducks in a row in terms of what's being covered by whom and how.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. So just to summarize, things that we want plan sponsors to walk away from, they really need to understand the level of fiduciary responsibility that their service providers are taking on. And then two, understanding the process that those service providers are going to utilize. Each one's different. They all do things differently. The committee has the opportunity to vet those and decide what they think is going to work best for them. James, Joe, thank you again for joining me. And thanks everyone for watching. Take care.